For generations, Canada and the United States shared more than an alliance. They were family. Their relationship was built on a foundation of mutual respect, shared values, and a deep sense of kinship that spanned centuries. From the earliest days of Confederation to the modern era, the two nations stood shoulder to shoulder through wars, economic booms, and global crises. The world's longest undefended border symbolized profound trust. It was a living testament to the peace and understanding that defined North America, where families, businesses, and cultures flowed freely across invisible lines. Canadians were America's reliable neighbors, partners in trade, defense, and culture. Together they built a legacy of cooperation, from joint military operations to vibrant cross-border festivals that celebrated their intertwined histories. But in 2025, this trust evaporated almost overnight. The world watched in disbelief as headlines announced a dramatic shift in the relationship. Donald Trump's return to the White House was a seismic event, replacing friendly handshakes with threats. Diplomatic channels that once buzzed with goodwill now echoed with suspicion and ultimatums. Canadians felt betrayed, as if their oldest friend now saw them as mere real estate. The sense of shock was palpable, rippling through living rooms and city streets from Vancouver to Halifax. Newly elected Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney declared the U.S. a country they could no longer trust. Parliament echoed with calls for unity and resilience in the face of this new reality. The America they knew seemed to vanish, replaced by an aggressive power. Rhetoric grew harsher, and the familiar neighborly warmth was replaced by cold calculation. This betrayal set the stage for an unexpected conflict, fought with tariffs and rhetoric. Trade wars erupted and leaders on both sides issued bold, uncompromising statements. Canada, once America's steadfast friend, was now its formidable opponent. The nation rallied, determined to defend its sovereignty and values against a former ally. The era of friendly cooperation was over, and a new, colder chapter in North American history began. Borders that once welcomed now bristled with tension, and communities that thrived on connection faced an uncertain future. The quiet Canadians were furious, ready to show their kindness was not weakness. Across the country, a new spirit of resolve took hold, as Canadians prepared to stand tall in the face of adversity. The idea seemed outlandish. Trump openly talked about annexing Canada. It was a bold statement that many initially dismissed as another one of his controversial remarks. He suggested it could become the 51st state, offering Canadians lower taxes and military protection. The proposal was framed as a generous offer, but it masked a deeper ambition. The rhetoric was bold and unsettling, treating a sovereign nation like a corporate asset. It was as if Canada was just another business deal waiting to be closed. In Canada, initial disbelief turned to concern as threats became consistent. The Canadian public and government began to realize the seriousness of the situation. Trump wasn't just targeting Canada, his gaze fell on Greenland and Panama too. These territories were seen as strategic assets in his vision of American expansion. Canadians realized this wasn't a joke but a flawed vision of American expansion. Protests erupted, and discussions about national sovereignty became more urgent. Trump framed annexation as a win-win, ignoring Canada's distinct identity. He overlooked the cultural and historical significance that Canada held for its people. Outgoing Prime Minister Justin Trudeau accused Trump of trying to collapse Canada's economy. He warned that such actions could have severe repercussions for both nations. The threat was backed by economic coercion, making it a real danger. The Canadian economy began to feel the pressure as markets reacted to the uncertainty. The friendly neighbor faced an existential threat from the country it trusted most. Families and communities across Canada were left in a state of anxiety and fear. The world watched as the U.S. president discussed conquering an ally, not with armies, but economic strangulation. International leaders were left to ponder the implications of such a move. The unthinkable had become a real and present danger. The idea of annexation, once dismissed as a far-fetched notion, was now a looming threat. The world watched in stunned silence. The potential for a major geopolitical shift was unfolding before their eyes. With annexation looming, Trump launched economic warfare against Canada. Tariffs targeted key industries like steel and lumber, aiming to cripple Canada's economy. But Canada fought back with retaliatory tariffs on American goods. They targeted products from key U.S. political districts, inflicting political pain. The message was clear: Canada would not back down. The trade war sent U.S. stock markets into a nosedive, fearing recession. American farmers and manufacturers felt the pinch as costs rose. The economic game of chicken hurt both sides, revealing the folly of tearing apart interconnected economies. Trump's conflict hurt the U.S. more than Canada, exposing deep cracks in his empire. The tariffs, meant to show strength, instead highlighted the deep interconnectedness of the two economies. The world watched as the trade war had no winners, only losers. The aggression against Canada sent a terrifying signal across the globe, shaking the very foundations of international trust. In capitals from Berlin to Tokyo, leaders watched in disbelief as the world's most powerful democracy turned on a peaceful neighbor. The shockwaves were immediate and profound. If the United States could threaten a long-standing NATO partner, who among its allies could truly feel secure? The alliance that once guaranteed collective defense now seemed fragile, its future uncertain. Former allies began to view the U.S. not as a leader, but as a rogue state, seemingly intent on dismantling the very empire it had built over decades. Trust, once the bedrock of American alliances, was eroding fast. In response, key allies accelerated their own defense strategies, holding urgent meetings and even considering nuclear deterrence for the first time in generations. The old security guarantees no longer seemed reliable. Nations began to rapidly build up their military capabilities, forging new alliances and defense pacts that deliberately excluded the United States. The world's security architecture was being rewritten. The global order was reshaped, not by the rise of a new superpower, but by the voluntary abdication of American leadership. New blocs and partnerships emerged, filling the vacuum left by Washington. Economically, countries scrambled to find alternatives to the U.S. dollar, seeking to insulate themselves from American unpredictability. The dominance of the dollar, once unquestioned, began to erode. Trump's bullying tactics and erratic policies only accelerated the decline of U.S. financial supremacy, sending markets into turmoil and undermining confidence in American stability. Instead of isolating Canada, the United States found itself increasingly isolated as former partners turned to each other for support and cooperation. Allies recoiled, determined to build a world no longer centered on Washington's leadership. The old order was gone, replaced by a new, uncertain reality. The alliances that had defined the post-war era frayed and splintered, leaving behind a fragmented and unpredictable world stage. The America First doctrine had achieved its ultimate unintended goal. America was truly alone, its influence diminished, its voice barely heard. The world watched, both anxious and resolute, as the United States dismantled its own empire and stepped back from the stage it once dominated. While targeting Canada, the U.S. crumbled internally. The focus on conquest led to chaos and incompetence in governance. Essential federal agencies were gutted, leaving vulnerabilities. Internal purges created a vacuum of expertise and experience. National parks fell into disarray and government services halted. A blunder even fired staff securing the nuclear arsenal, alarming the world. The U.S. appeared weak and dysfunctional on the global stage. The chaos was self-inflicted, valuing loyalty over competence. The empire rotted from within, with Americans living the consequences. The promise of prosperity under Trump turned into a nightmare. The focus on Canada seemed absurd as the country fell apart. The administration's priorities were dangerously misplaced. Inside Trump's mind, motives, and madness. Experts scrambled to understand his obsession with Canada. One theory suggested personal animosity toward Canadian leaders. Another saw it as psychological warfare, signaling unpredictability. Canada was a pawn in a larger geopolitical game. Republican strategist Amy Koch saw it as reasserting dominance over the Western Hemisphere. The threats were part of a broader strategy, rooted in Trump's real estate background. Motives were a messy mix of vendetta, posturing, and imperial dreams. Trump's actions were driven by impulse and ego, not coherent policy. This made him dangerously unpredictable. Whether strategic or personal, the result was destabilizing. The foreign policy undermined American interests and isolated the U.S. The world watched as Trump's motives led to chaos. A 19th-century dream in a 21st-century world. Trump's annexation vision echoed manifest destiny, a bygone era. He saw expansion as a legitimate tool, eager to revive it. But the world had changed. Such land grabs were now impossible. The norms of international relations made it catastrophic. The U.S. was undermining its own position through self-destructive decisions. The threats against Canada were choices, not external pressures. The US was tripping over its own feet, not brought down by rivals. Historians will marvel at how a nation engineered its own downfall. The 19th century dream became a 21st century nightmare. The US was not being brought down by a rival power, it was a voluntary abdication of power. The world watched as the US dismantled its own empire. The Maple Leaf rises, Canada's cold revenge. Canada transformed in response to the US threat. The nation found a new resolve, pivoting away from American dependency. Economically, Canada sought new trade partners, becoming self-reliant. Militarily, it increased spending, focusing on Arctic sovereignty. Canada built alliances with other middle powers, upholding international order. The threats united Canadians, sparking patriotism. Speculation about US occupation led to a nationalist resurgence. Canada's cold revenge proved Trump wrong. The pressure forged a stronger, more independent nation. Canada exposed the limits of Trump's tactics. The maple leaf was rising, demonstrating resilience over aggression. The world watched as Canada quietly rose. A new North America, the aftermath of ambition. The fall of the Trump empire was due to reckless ambition. The feud with Canada exposed strategic incompetence and alienated allies. The internal chaos and loss of trust created a perfect storm. The empire collapsed under self-inflicted wounds. Canada emerged more assertive and self-reliant, wary of the US. The undefended border remained, but trust was gone. The US faced a long road to recovery, rebuilding trust and services. The American brand was damaged, requiring more than a new president. The future of North America was defined by a stronger Canada and a chastened US. The dream of integration was a distant memory. Trump inadvertently unleashed Canadian independence, redrawing the map. The world watched as North America transformed.